Hey, 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 good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Liberty Hangout podcast. My name, of course, is Eric July, and I am the lead singer of the band BackWordz. And, of course, I'm a contributor also to the libertyhangout.org as well as being Tonight, we got a special show. Really looking forward to this. About to witness a very big-time heavyweight debate between two heavy hitters. In the yellow corner, representing Liberty Hangout, is Justin Moldo. He is the founder of Liberty Hangout. And in the red corner is Charles Pearl. How do you say your name, Charles? Say your last name right now, because I know it's a lot of confusion on that. Is it Perallo? Is it Perallo? What is it?
Perallo. What the?
Perallo. Okay.
Per like a good girl
Perallo.
after sex. Like a bad girl before sex. Low like your chances of getting laid with married to either of them. Perallo.
I like it. I like it. But of course, I'm gonna call you Perallo today. Perallo is the co-founder of Being Libertarian, of course. But this debate, which is going to be in the Oxford tradition, and the resolve is whether or not libertarians should love Gary Johnson. Charles is going to be arguing the affirmative, and Justin will be arguing in the negative. To start off with the debate, each participant will be given 3 minutes opening statement. I'll be keeping time, of course, so keep that in mind, guys. So let's start with you, Charles. Why in the world should libertarians love Gary Johnson?
With Gary Johnson, I think that there's 3 major parts here on why I would say that people should support him. And also, I think that with Gary Johnson, it extends past him and it goes to Bill Weld as well. But for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, I'd say the first part is these are guys who have done it before. These are guys who've been there. With Bill Weld, he was the only governor from 1990 to 1994 that actually had a state where the budget got cut. It wasn't by a lot, but it did get cut. And if you look at Massachusetts before that, they had average state growth of about 5% a year. He took over 4 years a budget, and it went from, let's say, 100% to 98%. So he did take it down 2%. He was the only governor in history to be given an A+ by the Cato Institute, the ACLU, and the NRA. He's a guy who works together. Gary Johnson, I just view as the ultimate Iron Man, a man who at the age of 40 had a company with 1,000 employees that he started right out of college. He never really held a traditional job, and he just started his own company and grew it. With New Mexico, he balanced 8 budgets. He was the first governor in the country to come out for legalization of marijuana, and Bill Weld was the first Republican governor to come out for legalization of gay marriage. So they've really worked together, and they've struck it. The second part is I would say that they are radicals, but they have a certain point of being radical. When we talk about these views, we have to really realize that we are here and our ideas are going over there. But there's a process to get in them. You have to work with Paul Ryan. You have to work with Mitch McConnell. You cannot just say, oh, we're going to end the Fed overnight, or else, what we see in London with Brexit right now with the pound going down, we could see that accelerated. So I look at these issues and I say that with Bill Weld, they're talking about practical reforms. They're saying, we should end the Fed, but let's start out with competitive currency and banks controlling interest rates over the Federal Reserve. They're saying, let's cut spending by 50%, ideally over the course of a decade, but let's start out with 20% to balance the budget. And the third reason why I would say to back them is really just, how do I put it? It's some way hard to describe the third reason I would support them, and it's because at the end of the day, they have a chance of getting into debates. They have a chance of getting us greater exposure. When have we ever had a candidate get to the debates before, or get on even national TV to say, hey, let's pardon 500,000 nonviolent offenders from jail. Let's make it so that people who are struggling with heroin addiction do not go to prison. Let's make it so we don't have bases all over the world. Let's make it so we support free trade. And they're the only guys on the ballots in all 50 states. In fact, there's going to only be 4 candidates on the ballots in over 25 states. And they're the only ones of those 4 that support free trade. So I'm going to say, yes, in the hell you support Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, and I'd say get excited about it. I'd say that also looking for the Libertarian Party in the past, these are great guys. People want to say, well, Gary Johnson's just a former Republican. What Republican in 1984 said, I'm not going to vote for Ronald Reagan, I'm going to vote Libertarian Party because Ronald Reagan's foreign policy views are insane and he's breaking the budget down.
Ding. 3 minutes
I'm out.
Is up. Okay, Justin, go ahead with your opening statement.
If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love forcing Jewish bakers to make Nazi wedding cakes. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love TPP. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love crony capitalism, because Johnson called TPP a crony capitalist bill a week before supporting it. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, they should love federally funding Planned Parenthood and love being forced to pay for the abortions of millions of innocent children. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love the United Nations, since Gary doesn't think that we should leave. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love humanitarian wars. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love gun control, the Patriot Act, eminent domain, and Obamacare, since his VP gun-grabbing Bill Weld holds these views, and Gary Johnson called Weld his role model in politics and thinks that he is the original libertarian. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love Bernie Sanders, since Gary says that he agrees with Bernie 73% of the time. If libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love Hillary Clinton, since Gary thinks that she's a wonderful public servant and that she shouldn't go to prison for deleting, 30,000 secret emails and receiving, $250 million in bribes from murderous foreign regimes. And if libertarians should love Gary Johnson, then they should love electing economic illiterates into office, because Gary has very little understanding of how the free market works if he believes that intervention is necessary to quell discrimination or mandate equal pay for equal work. Libertarians don't love Gary Johnson and shouldn't love Gary Johnson, because anyone who loves these things is not a libertarian.
Ooh, great opening statements, gentlemen. So let's move on to the next part of the debate. Each of you, of course, will be able to ask the other one question, and the person responding will have 2 minutes to answer. Now, if you would like to respond to that answer, you're going to get 1 minute to do so. So let's start with you, Justin, and your question for Charles.
All right, my first question for you, Charles, considering that you support TPP and to some degree support the United Nations and have recently defended Johnson Weld's nice comments about Obama and Clinton, I'm curious to know how you define libertarianism.
Well, I define libertarianism as protecting the property. You have the rights to your property, and essentially you have, let's say, on an economic front, a laissez-faire front, and you cannot damage another group's property. But I would just like to point out, TPP does not violate libertarianism. We do have trade laws, and I would say that when it comes to TPP, it's not perfect. Gary Johnson has never claimed it's perfect, and he said he would modify it, as I think everyone running has said that as well. But we look at TPP and we say, okay, hey, this is going to get rid of all of our tariffs from 12 nations on imported goods, especially on ag products, where we talk right now about the obesity in this country, and we don't realize, hey, the problem is our sugarcane tariffs are insane. This wipes that out. Let's look at, Planned Parenthood, for example. Gary has said he would get rid of Planned Parenthood. He would defund it, but you have to do it properly, and also he would not support just giving them the first thing to defund while the military budget is insane. And also, if we did defund it and we didn't do abortion coverage, which, by the way, federal funds don't actually go to Planned Parenthood for abortion. It's spread off of more things like breast cancer analysis and birth control as well. But if we did get rid of that, abortion, like the impact that would have on Medicaid is far more than what we spend on Planned Parenthood. So I look at that and I say, libertarianism, Gary knows what it is. If you ask him the majority of issues, he aligns with the other people he ran against in the Libertarian Party, probably 90 to 100% of the time with them. And I would say for those issues, also with the United Nations, there's nothing really anti-libertarian about the United Nations as long as the actual foreign policy that they implement does not violate it. But there is nothing wrong with having a global forum, which that's what Gary supports. And also Gary does support massive defunding of the United Nations and having, I believe, the $5 billion go to about $2 billion. So there is a lot of changes there that Gary does want to make.
All right, good timing, right at 2 minutes. So, Justin, did you want to go ahead and give a response to that?
Yeah, I like what you're saying about how libertarianism is protecting property. I just wish that this was something that would come out of Gary's mouth. He very rarely even talks about libertarianism, and when he does, he labels it as fiscally conservative, socially. He changed it up from socially liberal to now socially inclusive after people were giving him flack for saying socially liberal.
Well, I would say he did that because, first off, I'd say it's an example of how he does listen to his base. So I'd say socially inclusive is better than saying socially liberal, and I understand why there were some changes there. Now, for why doesn't Gary bring up libertarianism much? I mean, it's the logo he follows. He has endorsed it. He has said it. When it comes to, like, I would say with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I don't think every interview they go out and say, we're progressive, we're conservative. Granted, they're arguably not for either one, but still, I would say at the end of the day, they do bring up the banner enough, but you have to bring up real policies.
Okay, you want to give a quick response to that, real quick, Justin?
Yeah, I think just a little further. I think, Charles, you know the audience we're talking to tonight, man. To tell them that you support the United Nations, I don't think you're gonna get away with that.
Oh, I'm gonna get some. I'm expecting one. I'm expecting some curse words tonight.
Great. Did you want to go ahead and did you want to respond to that, Justin?
Let's move on.
You want to move on? Move on? Okay, Charles, I know it's your turn. Did you want to go ahead and ask that question for Justin?
I've got a really simple one. What do you like about Gary Johnson?
What do I like about Gary Johnson? Oh man, how much time you got? I'm gonna need to think. Okay, I'll give him credit where it's due. I like when Gary Johnson does say that we should rein in government. I just wish he would take this more to its logical conclusion.
Okay.
He called for a 50% cut in government since his campaign in 2011. He's endorsed almost all of Ron Paul's deregulations. I mean, when it comes to this idea, Gary's not libertarian enough. I really like. I would ask them, and I would say this first off. I'd say he's arguably more libertarian than Rand Paul. It depends on the issue. I'll give it that. Like, I think on economics, we can probably call it a tie. Social issues, we might give it to Gary. Foreign policy, we might give it to Rand, but I'd say it's pretty close. But I would say that, like, regarding Ron Paul, does anyone think Ron Paul, like, every one of his views could really have happened on the first day in office? I mean, Ron Paul said, my first day in office, I'd love to see the Fed abolished, which Gary has said we would end the Fed, but the first day, I mean, if we want to talk about something that's going to be like, imagine what's going on with Brexit right now, where the pound goes down 10%. Imagine that times 1,000. Imagine the Dow going down below 4,000 as a result. I mean, there'd be a lot of crazy stuff to happen.
Charles, I'm glad you actually mentioned the Fed, because that's another thing I haven't really been hearing Gary talking a lot in 2016. I think there's a real big disparity between the Gary of 2012 and 2016. I don't know if it's because he was running off of what Ron Paul was going with in 2012, but yes, he'll answer in the debates, I think we should get rid of the Federal Reserve, but he's not talking about it. And quite frankly, I don't even know if Gary knows why the Federal Reserve is bad. For any of you, I'm sure you've seen his interview with Robert Wenzel of Economic Policy Journal when he was asked about the Austrian business cycle, and Gary didn't know squat. So I honestly don't know if he knows why the Federal Reserve is bad, or if he was just taking one of Ron Paul's talking points from 2012.
That's a great point. Well, we're gonna move on, because I do have a question for you guys that's kind of along the lines of the deals that you were just talking about. But again, you're gonna get 2 minutes to respond to this question that I have for both of you guys. So as you know, bake the cake has kind of become a slogan among libertarians when referencing Gary Johnson. You know, this subject matter alone has really made people reluctant to even just support him altogether. So, you know, Charles, I'd like to ask you first, do you feel as if this has been blown out of proportion, and why?
Well, I'd say it's been blown out of proportion because this is a law that is over 50 years old. I mean, it has been around since 1964, and it has been in place where really it's had no impact on unemployment. It has no impact on taxes. It has no impact on spending. Now, you look at the thing, bake the cake. Do people have the rights to their property? I would say so. Do I fully agree with Gary Johnson on this stance? No. And I would say my ideal solution, what I would say is I would say that the government has the right to discriminate against discriminators, and we should get rid of tax loopholes and tax deductions for businesses that are proven to discriminate, because I think that it would be a government right to do. But here's the thing. Gary has not taken this stance, and if Gary did take this stance, I just want to point out an example from Rand Paul. Rand Paul's 2010 Senate campaign nearly collapsed when he said, I'm not sure if I would vote for the Civil Rights Act because of that one provision. This was a guy who was leading his opponent, Jack Conway, by 20 points, and one comment about this, and his poll numbers went from a 20-point lead to under 10 points. So I would say it's a big issue. I can kind of see why Gary's taken the stance he does. And you know what? At the end of the day, and also I would just like to point out with Gary Johnson, his stance on the bake the cake thing, what he has said regarding bakers is that would a Christian baker have to do a gay wedding cake? He might have to write Jack and James, but he does not have to do anything that would be out of what he would do for another customer. So it's not that you're requiring him to change his brand, change his image, but just sell them the cake and offer the same services he would for another customer, which I don't think is that unreasonable.
Okay. Justin, I want you to answer that. Now, do you feel like it's been blown out of proportion, or do you think that this is more, I guess, alarming?
I think first and foremost, I'm having a tough time wrapping my mind around what Charles just said. Government has the right to discriminate against discriminators. I don't think that really adds up well to what you said libertarianism is about protecting property. But furthermore, I think that the assessment of Gary's comments were in line. I mean, there's nothing more antithetical to libertarianism than saying you don't have the right to your property, and I think it's very ignorant to the laws of economics to suggest that the government should get involved. And if the government does get involved, then guess what? Then we're advocating for crony capitalism. So I think that, and I think going back just to talk about the Civil Rights Act, you know, if Gary doesn't want to talk about it, that's okay, but don't take a stance that is antithetical to libertarianism, which is what he has done. And even when we had, furthermore, I think, you know, even when we had Eric on our podcast, he went so far as to say that he believes that the Civil Rights Act should be repealed. So I think that if we as libertarians have opposed government-imposed segregation, and that's what led to the creation of the Civil Rights Act, then why can't we be as vociferous in trying to amend the laws that have forced integration, which is what is present in Title II of the Civil Rights Act?
We have a lot of time. Did you want to give a quick response to that?
Well, I would give just two responses. The first is serious. The second is kind of funny. With the first thing I'd like to say is just regarding tax deductions and so on. The fact is, you know, the government can, if they offer services, they can make policies which do change. I mean, for example, if the government is to offer some sort of defense service or like a snowplow service, perhaps they can say this area gets priority due to certain factors. So I don't think there's anything irrational about saying, hey, these people are like having the SWAT sticker out, we can deny them tax deductions, which I would just say for a lot of anarchists and libertarians, view this as a bonus because this is less government at the end of the day. And the second thing is, I went to the Orlando Convention.
I'm sorry, I didn't fully catch it. It was tax deductions for who you're proposing?
Basically, let's just say we have a group which is proven as a discriminator. We say that, okay, you're not going to get tax deductions anymore, and that's your penalty. And I would say the reason for that penalty is that this is something the government offers, and they could take it away not to offer it. And also perhaps some other government services as well could be blocked out due to that as a penalty. And you know, if the government offers these, maybe, and these are things libertarians want to get rid of to begin with, for the most part. Maybe we can just say, hey, these are blocked out because they followed something that was less preferential. And the second thing is, and this is the funny thing, I was at the Orlando Convention all 6 days, and I'm going to make one point. I never saw from the McAfee campaign, the Peterson campaign, the Perry campaign, I never once saw a gay Nazi cake come out, and I really think they missed an opportunity to bring some delegates. So bad campaigning on their part.
Did you want to give a quick response to that, Justin?
Yeah, my mind is still blown here, Charles. You said libertarianism is protecting property, but now you're saying that if someone's free speech goes against what you believe in, you're advocating getting rid of tax deductions, which means taxing them more, which means stealing from them more because taxation is theft? How is this libertarian?
You know, I was actually keeping a monitor of how many minutes we were going to go until the term taxation is theft wasn't used. Let's see. It looks like we've broken 15 minutes, so that's a new one. No, but I would say that, look, I would say the reality is that you can structure services differently to penalize certain groups without having it be anti-libertarian. And I'd say that these groups that are engaging in like racist activity, I don't think that they should be attacked. I don't think they should be jailed. I do think that if we are offering...
But you just want them stolen from.
Hey, you know what? Here's the thing. I would say that we would put them at the same rate, and we would take deductions that would be previously offered to them, and we wipe those out. And I look at it when it comes to deductions anyway. As libertarians, we should favor pretty much flattening the tax code as much as possible because deductions do cause crony capitalism. So let's view this as a bonus. But I think this is a simple compromise where you can take a lot of people who view this stance libertarians have on property rights as madness and maybe turn them around and say, well, we can structure it this model and we can have a little bit of benefit there. But I think I will take it as an agreement that you do think the other campaigns missed a market and opportunity by not serving gay Nazi kick at the convention.
I would agree with you 100% there.
There was a missed market and there was a missed opportunity there.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure I agree with your analysis that it would be a fair compromise to give government the power to penalize those whose speech they disagree with and rid of their tax deductions. I mean, what if the government starts saying that anything a Christian does is, quote, discriminatory? What if they say that anything Being Libertarian or libertyhangout.org does is discriminatory? This is a very slippery slope, Charles.
It is a very slippery slope, but I mean, there's a lot. Everything with government is a slippery slope at the end of the day. That's just the reality there. You need to have some checks and balances. I'm just saying I think this is a better alternative to what we have now, and I think it would be much superior. But at the end of the day, when it comes to this whole gay Nazi kick issue, I look at it like this. It is a 5-decade-old law. It has not been used. It has no impact on unemployment.
All right, well, let me ask you this then, because I made the comparison before comparing government-imposed segregation to integration. If people were living in the 1950s and segregation was more than 5 decades old, would you have opposed that? Would you have opposed getting rid of it?
Oh, I would have absolutely opposed it because segregation was something you could visibly see in everyday culture. When you have to point out to a 7-year-old that you can't go to the same public school as your neighbor because you're black, that is, of course, something that you'd recognize. I rarely go out and I rarely see an economic impact because like some homophobic baker will not write Jack and James on a cake.
Mm. Well, great.
I'm just for me to respond quickly to that. I'm very in shock because I know that you are very outspoken against Donald Trump's protectionist policies, and essentially what Title II does, it's affirmative action. That is very akin to protectionism.
I don't think it is affirmative action, clearly. In fact, it has stopped some affirmative action cases with colleges where they were given some people certain aids over others. It has been taken to court before, and they have done some resolutions. And look, I'm going to say this. Is it 100% perfect? No, I personally don't believe so. Is it a big enough deal where we're going to actually go out and say we wouldn't have signed the Civil Rights Act because of it, and we would have told 7-year-old kids they can't attend the same schools as other kids, and we would have denied fire and bus services to people? No, I wouldn't have said that.
Great. Well, I tell you what, guys, let's move on. I want to let's see if we can expand on some different deals regarding Gary Johnson. But let's get back to the first portion in which we were talking about. You guys were asking each other questions. But let's start with you this time, Charles. Of course, Justin, you'll have a couple of minutes to respond. Did you have another question that you wanted to go ahead and ask Justin, Charles?
Would I have another question to ask Justin? I would say really like. I would say the ideal is this. Austin Peterson kind of bashed the anarchist. You and I interviewed John McAfee together. He did not at the time. At the time, I think we could say that, like, compared to the Gary platform we have now and John McAfee's original platform, I think John was a little bit less libertarian at the time. Darryl Perry was the only one that seemed to have a real anarcho-capitalist platform. Where do you draw the line? Because I know your views are anarcho-capitalist or volunteerist. Where would you say you stand on, like, when is enough to compromise? Because clearly I think there are some views where Austin Peterson and you would have had a compromise. So where do you think the line should be drawn, and how would you react on that?
Right. I mean, obviously, Austin Peterson and I didn't agree with each other 100%, being that I'm an anarcho-capitalist and he's a minarchist, but I put this out on Facebook. I wrote, the reason that I supported Austin Peterson over Darryl Perry is because, in actuality, if they were elected, their plans would be so similar because the president, they wouldn't be moving right to Ancapistan as they're in the White House. Both Austin Peterson and Darryl Perry would be trying to shrink government as much as possible. Whereas I think Gary Johnson, he's proven too much that he's willing to compromise with these big government progressives. I mean, he had the biggest exposure of his life in the CNN town hall, and when he was asked about the drug war, instead of explaining how it was the drug war itself that led to the issues of that mother who had the son that died, and saying how, listen, maybe if drugs were legalized, your son could have been diagnosed by a doctor, could have been put on smaller doses. Instead, what he said is, "Oh, we're just going to legalize marijuana." Like he's not conveying the principles. Well, I don't know if I've drawn the line too many times, especially with the not wanting to cut Planned Parenthood. I cannot support someone who wants my taxes to go to fund abortions. I can't support someone who thinks we can be in the United Nations. I can't support someone who thinks that Hillary Clinton is a wonderful public servant. There's just way too many lines that have been drawn for too many libertarians.
Great. You have 1 minute, Charles. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to point out a little thing. I feel like Gary Johnson, when he had that woman come up to him and saying, "My son has been in a wheelchair for the last 10 years due to a lethal injection of poison," he's just looking at her, looking at Chris Cuomo, looking at her like, Hillary Clinton gets like a freaking puppy thrown at her. I get this. He's like, thanks guys. But when it comes to that issue, I mean, I would first off point out again with Planned Parenthood, you could look at his statements on this issue and say that when it comes to Planned Parenthood, he does want to defund it, but he just said he doesn't think it should have a priority to defund.
He put out on Facebook that he does not want to defund.
No, well, he said on Facebook he said he would not have a priority to defund before other things get defunded, and he also would cut the funds massively as well. But he also said the issue with defunding it is if Planned Parenthood went under, the new cost of Medicaid are going to be much higher than what we spend on Planned Parenthood. So there needs to be a real plan here, and he's open to that. The next thing I'd like to mention would be what was one of your other points there? Sorry.
Believing Hillary Clinton is a wonderful public servant.
I think we're gonna have another question about that later, but I will have a point on the drug war. With Gary Johnson, he did say he would decriminalize pretty much all the drugs. He would not send anyone to prison for drug violations anymore, and he would adopt a policy more like Poland, which does focus on rehabilitation, and also it's more like Portugal as well. So I think that does work, and I think that is a fair enough compromise. But I think these reasons that we're seeing to not support Gary, to some extent, I think they're just like little nitpicks. They're not that huge of a deal. They don't have any real economic impact. They don't have a huge foreign policy impact. I don't think they're big enough. But I think my minute is up.
Yes, it is. Go ahead. If you had a question, Justin, you just asked that. Charles asked the question before, but Justin, did you have a question another question for Charles you wanted to ask him?
Right, so now I know that Charles has called me a purist for not supporting Johnson because Charles tries to be more of a pragmatist. He likes trying to get these bills through Congress, through the government, as long as it can shrink government even a little bit. So my question for you, Charles, is would you support a presidential candidate who would lower the corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%? Would that be reasonable to get through?
Well, I supported Rand Paul, so yes. That was exactly Rand Paul's tax plan.
And would you support a candidate who would repeal Obamacare?
I would support a candidate who would repeal Obamacare, yes.
What about someone who would abolish the DEA or the EPA? Or someone who would eliminate Common Core?
Well, with Common Core, I view that as a policy of the Department of Education. Gary said abolish the Department of Education, so has Rand Paul. So yes, I would say with those things.
And do you think that if... All right, continue.
Go, please, no, go on.
And if this candidate had a viable chance of winning the White House, because let's be honest, Gary Johnson doesn't have a snowball's chance of ever seeing the White House. He only got 1% in 2012, and let's be honest, he's probably not going to win come November. So if this candidate that had these positions was running, would you support someone like that?
I think you're going to say Donald Trump has these positions.
Yeah, so I'm curious for you then, Charles. If you're the pragmatist here and you want to try to make little incy-bincy changes towards freedom, why are you not supporting Donald Trump, you purist?
Because Donald Trump, first off, I would say that Donald Trump has a clear record of flip-flop, and he supported a 15% tax on wealth. All wealth that was not real estate, I might add, if anyone has any questions about that. I would say that, honestly, when it comes to the biggest reason I don't support Donald Trump, it comes down to his views on trade. The fact is, if he were to ever have his views on trade come out, the economy would collapse, and I think you could agree with that. A 40% tax tariff on Chinese imported goods would lead to a global economic destruction, like something I don't think we've ever seen. And I would say that the benefits of Gary Johnson and Bill Weld is, they're not going to win, but here's the thing, they have a very good chance of making it to the debates right now. In fact, I mean, even some people who are political experts have said, I think they're probably going to get into debates. I think there's over a 50% chance of that. So I would love to see Bill Weld, who I think even people who don't really like Bill Weld admit he's very well spoken. I would like to see him go up against Chris Christie or Jeff Sessions, one of those morons, and look at him in the face and say, your guy supports a 40% tariff. The last time a tariff that was half that size got implemented was called Smoot-Hawley. It destroyed the economy. So I would like to see that. And I think when it comes to Donald Trump also. I've looked at him on a fiscal front, and he's not for cut and spend. And I was there when he announced his presidential run. He said he would expand Medicare and Social Security by 20%. He's not retracted that. He said he would increase the defense budget 50%, and he's not really named many things he would cut. So I think Donald Trump, honestly, I've said this, I think he's worse than Hillary Clinton on a lot of issues, and I think for the most part he is worse than Hillary. And I think the guy would be is the worst Republican nominee. I would, honestly, I can't name a worse Republican nominee.
Did you want to go ahead and make a response to that, Justin?
Yeah, Charles. I mean, we look at a candidate like Hillary Clinton, who we know she's going to get in there, and she's going to do nothing but grow government in every single field. So if we know that the choices are going to be between a Hillary Clinton and a Donald Trump, I still don't get why you're drawing a line and being too much of a purist to get these things through Congress and try to shrink the tax rate and get rid of the DEA and EPA.
I just want to open up. When you said Hillary Clinton was going to do nothing, that was the greatest pitch I've ever had for her as a candidate. I was excited there. I was like, she's going to do nothing? Wow.
Do nothing but.
Yeah, then I heard the button. It all ended. When it comes to Hillary Clinton, how do I put it? It is very hard to decide who's worse here. The thing about Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, I don't think it actually, I think we reach a point when it comes to a third party where it doesn't matter anymore. And with these two, I don't think it really matters. I see at the end of the day, I see Donald Trump getting elected, and the only benefit of him is that he would be so bad that no candidate would ever try to put a tariff again in history because it would have collapsed the economy. And I look at Hillary Clinton and I just see, here's going to be a one-term president who is going to absolutely flop. She won't really do much. I think she'll increase government a whopping 3% a year, maybe introduce one really bad law, but I don't think she'll absolutely destroy things. So I would say that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld are the best options, and I think it is part of being a pragmatist to say step back. And I'd also point out, Ross Perot had no chance of winning in 1992, but he ran on a couple of very simple reforms, one of which was balancing the budget. Guess what? They balanced the budget for the 5 years after Ross Perot, that race happened. So I think they do care, and I think if Gary Johnson can hit 10% or 20%, there will be a new base to emerge, and it could hit.
Great. Okay, guys, I wanted to ask you each one more question. Now, I know, Justin, you were a Peterson supporter during his run. What do you think, I guess, makes him more electable than that of maybe a Gary Johnson?
Right, well, right before the weekend of the Libertarian Party convention, I came out and I made a video on the Liberty Hangout Facebook page, and I was explaining things from a little bit of a marketing perspective here, because when it comes to marketing, there's really two important things. You have to have knowledge of your product, and you have to have knowledge of your consumers and your target demographics. And the reason that I think Peterson had this down pat is that he right off the bat, he knew that libertarianism was the idea that you own yourself and no one has the right to dictate what you should do with your person or your property. So he knew the product that he was selling, and he knew the demographics that he was trying to sell to, because guess what? There's a really big voting bloc that is disenfranchised right now. That's the never Trump voters. And the reason they're never voting for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton is because they are looking for that principled constitutional candidate, and they got that in someone like Austin Peterson, who was out there talking about the Constitution every single day, whereas I'm not seeing that from Gary Johnson. He's not even talking about the Constitution. He's just making these wonkish statements that really, to some effect, don't really make sense. And Gary Johnson, he's now saying that he wants to drag in the Bernie supporters, yet he's going on CNN calling Hillary Clinton a wonderful public servant when the Bernie supporters hate Hillary Clinton. So obviously, Austin Peterson, he would have been able to attract the Never Trump crowd, which is a huge, huge demographic, whereas those Bernie supporters, Gary Johnson's not doing an effective job of bringing them in, and he has to be cognizant of the fact that many of them are going to either vote for Hillary Clinton to vote along party lines, or they're going to go over to Jill Stein. And when Jill Stein is included in the same polls as Gary Johnson, because right now Gary Johnson is out there saying, yeah, if we hit 15%, we're going to make it in the polls. And when it's just him and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, he is polling pretty well. I'll give him that. But once they throw Jill Stein's name in there, he's barely doing better than her.
Great points. What about you, Charles? What do you think makes Gary Johnson a little more electable than that of a Austin Peterson?
Well, I would say that Austin Peterson, throughout the entire 10-month cycle he ran for president, from that point he announced to currently, he only has had one major network interview, and that was for him surrogating for Gary Johnson. I think when it comes to Gary Johnson versus Austin Peterson, I don't want to make the primary's over. Gary won by a very significant margin. I don't want to bash Gary. I just want to point out on social media, on Google searches, Gary beat Austin 100-1, like every single time. In fact, even after the Glenn Beck interview, Austin, for I think a whopping 10 minutes, beat out Gary. Now, for going back to the actual strategy, I think the approach is getting both the never Trump people and the never Hillary people. So doing that, I think that they've reached out to both demographics very well. With Hillary Clinton, I just want to point out, Bernie Sanders said, I don't care about your freaking emails. Bernie Sanders ran an issues-based campaign and didn't really attack his opponent. When he did that at that debate, he went from 24% to 40% in under a 60-day cycle, and he raised more money than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton got taken down with all the Republicans attacking her over Benghazi. She went with Trey Gowdy, wasting his time. Guess what? She raised $8 million in 2 days and saw her poll numbers go up from that. So I don't think it's good strategy to blackout attack her. I think what is important to say is she's a flip-flopper, which Gary has said, and I think also it's important to attack her on some key issues regarding marijuana policy, gay marriage. But regarding the never Trump Republicans, if you look at the poll numbers of where they seem to stand, it seems like they're not really the constitutionalists. It looks like a lot of the Ted Cruz people have went over to Donald Trump. The people who are Republicans who do not really like Donald Trump, they're more of the Mitt Romney type. And Mitt Romney said he's considering endorsing Gary Johnson. A lot of people in the Republic, Ben Sass has said it's not off the table. So I think I think the strategy, it has a couple of tiers. Go on more popular media such as Joe Rogan, which has a lot of Bernie people. I think Gary does very well in those types of interviews. I'll admit he needs to work on his style for some more major network stuff. But then you bring Bill Weld in for a more Republican-style interview. You have him network up with some of the Republican bigwigs, get their endorsements. I think that's good strategy. And the final point is regarding that comment on Jill Stein. She's been only a couple of polls compared to Gary, and even the ones where she is in it, she seems to get about 3 to 7%. And I would say Gary still gets about 9 to 12%. And Gary's numbers are going up. And I would also say, I'd point this out as the big factor. There is no reason that the Green Party, if the Green Party nominated Dennis Kucinich, they would be absolutely in every major media right now. They'd be in every poll. They'd probably be doing better than Gary. They nominated a doctor who nobody really heard of, which the Libertarian Party had several candidates nobody really heard of. And guess what? They're not getting any big endorsements. They're not getting any big interviews. They're not really getting out there. They're not getting in the polls. So I think that is the big benefit to Gary Johnson as a whole. And the same goes for Bill Weld. And I would point out with Bill Weld, with the vice presidential candidates, the three of us are very active libertarians. Did any of us know any of the Bill Weld people, like any of the VP candidates, a month before the convention? Did anyone have any clue who any of these people were? And I think a lot of them, one guy ran saying, oh, the token gay guy. One guy had a logo saying Muslims for liberty, like anybody's going to give it the slightest care on that. So I think there was a weak VP field overall.
Great. I wanted to kind of bounce off a point that you just touched on before we get into closing, and I'm going to pass this question to Justin first, and then you can go ahead and answer as well, Charles. But as far as we talk about with strategy, it seems as if Gary Johnson is seeming to try to, I guess, appeal more to leftists as opposed to that never Trump crowd, the cruel supporters, which seem to be fair, maybe a little more liberty-minded. Do you think that approach is more effective? Should we be appealing to that leftist crowd as opposed to maybe those more liberty-minded, never Trump cruel supporters?
From my experience, I think it's a terrible strategy. I mean, just going back to that whole marketing strategy, in the video I did, I was holding up phones. I compared the scenario to the candidates going out and selling iPhones, and I compared the never Trump people to Android users, and Austin and Gary, they were out trying to sell iPhones, and Gary was out trying to sell to the Bernie supporters who were out using flip phones. And so, which quite honestly, when shocked.
Well, kids are, well, here's the thing. They're just complaining that there's 23 brands of deodorant out there.
Well, maybe they should be using flip phones. But anyway, what I want to say is why I think it's a terrible strategy is because, look, before I was a libertarian, I considered myself a constitutionalist, and I know that there are a lot of the constitutionalists who will support the Rubios, they'll support the flawed candidates, but at the end of the day, their base for their political views is the Constitution. And Ron Paul, he brought so many people to libertarianism by talking about the Constitution, and that's how he brought in all these conservatives. Whereas Gary Johnson, he's targeting these people that don't really have a fond understanding of philosophy or what we stand for. Try telling property rights to a Bernie supporter. Try telling Eric knows this better than any of us.
I will make one
strategy.
Yeah, go ahead and ask.
I will make one small interruption and point out that about 40% of Ron Paul's voters in 2012 did vote for Donald Trump in the Republican primary, and about the other 40% vote, like the other 60% voted for Ted Cruz. So I don't think they're the most. It was not the best way to expand liberty. But
well, I think just tailoring off with that, and I'll let you talk after that. I know that the Libertarian Party at the convention, they thanked Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton for being the best recruiters for the LP this election cycle. But I think Gary Johnson is now the best recruiter for the Trump and Clinton campaigns.
I'm going to disagree with that one. But regarding the strategy of who's the better group to reach out to, Bernie or Trump people, or never Trump, the Bernie people, or perhaps the Republicans who never back Trump, I would say that they are focusing on both crowds. The thing is, they're going on every media they can. They are speaking a message, which is a pretty solid libertarian message. I'd say it's definitely more libertarian than a few of the other Libertarian Party nominees over the years. Now, for who they're actually gearing on, I would say the big reason it seems like they're more Bernie supporters is because although they are getting major network interviews, a lot of the stuff they are getting are things like the Joe Rogan podcast, Adam Carolla, things that the Bernie Sanders audience does watch more, Bill Maher. So they're getting more opportunities to appeal to the Bernie crowd. And I think there is a strategy to get the Republicans, but that relies more on high-tier endorsements. Now, to why I think we might have to seriously look at the Bernie Sanders supporters and say, maybe this is a better demographic to really reach out to. The reason I would say that is this, because I've really looked at it, and I think if you were to ask a lot of generic Republicans, what would you cut spending-wise? They'll say, oh, we got to cut the damn welfare because there's too many people living on the dole. I think that's kind of how they act. Now, if you talk, welfare for the federal budget makes up 4%. If you want to talk to the Bernie people, what would they want to cut? I guarantee you they could say, I guarantee you I can get 90% of Bernie Sanders people to say, let's cut the defense budget 50 to 70%.
Until Bernie starts advocating to go bomb Syria, then they're okay with that.
Are we really going to trust the Bernie Sanders people to know he supported that? Are we going to trust the Bernie Sanders people to know to actually think they knew that? But here's the thing: they would support cutting defense. So I think there are arguments that you can get to both. I don't think the strategy should be to market to either side, and I think you should. And I think from the polls, you look at it, it seems like they get an equal divide of people who would have voted for Trump or Clinton. It doesn't seem like they're taken from either side in particular. And the other thing is, Hillary Clinton can throw at us and Elizabeth Warren, and it might get all the Bernie people. Donald Trump could throw at us oh my God, does anyone want to be that guy's VP at this point? Hypothetically, he could throw at us a good VP who is a conservative, and maybe that does get the support that he's been lacking. But you know what? It's like I think they have a strategy of going after both groups, and I don't think anything's stopping from that. And I don't think they've been anti-going to the Trump people or anti-going to the Bernie people.
So just as a question, if you think that they are trying to go after the never Trump people, how is it effective for them to say that Hillary Clinton is a wonderful public servant and that they don't think that she should be indicted? How can they say that she's qualified for president when she's under federal investigation?
Well, I would say that when it comes to Hillary Clinton, nothing. Like I would trust Bill Weld's advice on this. Bill Weld is a very experienced lawyer. He knows everyone on the team. He has said, and I'm going to trust his advice. He said that the Hillary effort, it's going to lead to nothing, and it's just going to make her attack her enemies more. Because if you look at history when it comes to the Clintons, they get involved in a ton of scandals where the scandals are never things the majority of people care about. And they raise a ton of money off of the people who attack them. And that's exactly what happened with Benghazi, and that's probably what's going to happen with this email situation. Let's just attack Hillary Clinton on the fact that she says one year, oh, gays don't have the right to get married, and the next year they do, because the polls change for it. That's what Gary Johnson and Bill Weld are doing. Now, when it comes to them saying that she's a decent public servant, you know what? I had a troubled stomach in that. I think that they've said a lot of negative stuff about her, too. But I would say this, that I think they're taking the strategy that Bernie took, where talk about the issues with the Democrats, do not talk about Hillary Clinton. And, you know, Bernie Sanders, he raised a lot of money, and he had his polls go up a lot when he did that.
So if they're taking the strategy that Bernie's taking, are you implying that they are going to endorse Hillary after they drop out?
Ooh. Well, let's see. They're not going to drop out.
Bill Weld. Wait. Bill Weld did say if there was no Libertarian candidate, he would vote for Hillary. And this actually brings us to a good question.
I said that as well. I said that as well.
Okay, well, there's a good question that's coming from our fans watching on YouTube. Someone wants to know, and we can answer this. Is there a conceivable chance that Bill Weld is actually running the show?
Well, here's the thing. I've met Bill Weld. I was on the same delegation as him in the Orlando convention. The thing is, I don't think he's running the show, because I think that, here's the thing. The fact that Gary Johnson has worn sneakers on major network TV shows, Bill Weld is not running the show. But I think that
he actually wore shiny shoes on CNN.
And Bill Weld had nothing to do with that, actually. But Bill Weld said, I had nothing to do with this. He surprised me. When it comes to Bill Weld, look, Bill Weld got involved in this campaign very late. I got a phone call from a friend of mine on the Johnson camp before it made media saying it's going to be Bill Weld, and I was like, "You're kidding me!" I thought he was going to say, "You're joking, right?" And it was like, "No, it's Bill Weld." I'm like, bullshit. And then a day later, I see it was Bill Weld. But there was no real conversations with him until a couple of weeks before the conventions, and he only made the decision he wanted to get involved when Ted Cruz dropped out. So I don't think he's running the show. I don't think there's any say. But I will say this, though. There is a partnership here between those two guys. It is not like Hillary Clinton, where she's having a Game of Thrones style coronation for her VP, and she's running around saying, is Tim Kaine going to bring me the most slave girls and slave boys? And with Donald Trump, it's more of just who I did not insult on Twitter in the last week. And I think so I think the strategy is a partnership. I think Bill has made concessions. I think Gary's made concessions. I think it works out.
Great. Well, we're closing in on 45 minutes, so let's go ahead and get into the closing statements. Charles, you started off with the opening statements, so we're going to go ahead and let Justin go first. You got 3 minutes. Go ahead and let us know why libertarians should not love Gary Johnson.
All right, so as I mentioned in my intro statement, there are many of Gary Johnson's positions that I believe have been an affront to libertarianism. And if you go to his website, it only says the word libertarian 3 times. Once on a Be a Libertarian with Me t-shirt, another in his bio stating his previous run in 2012, and the 3rd time on another t-shirt. No mention of the Libertarian Party anywhere or what libertarian philosophy is. Nothing. And after he won the nomination, Johnson said in an interview with MSNBC, quote, "This would be a separation from the Libertarian Party. This would be the Johnson Campaign Organization," end quote. And he's proven just that. Bill Weld told CNN, quote, "A bunch of Republicans might view our brand of republicanism as quite palatable," end quote. And as I mentioned earlier in his 2012 interview with Robert Wenzel of Economic Policy Journal, Gary revealed that he's never read any libertarian literature in his life. He said that he's never read any Mises, no Rothbard, and when he cited Milton Friedman, he was incorrect about his positions. He claimed that he read from the Cato Institute, but he couldn't reference who. At the Colorado Libertarian Party convention this year, Gary Johnson couldn't even answer the question, what is the definition of a right? And given many of Gary's stances, I don't even know if he believes that we have a right to freedom. I think that he's taken the position as much more of a consequentialist. Sure, there are some positions of Gary's to like, but I could easily pick out things to like about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, too. The fact of the matter is that Gary Johnson is, in my opinion, no libertarian. I think he's a political opportunist. And if he's going to lie about his political identity, and he has the gall to lie about throwing out Austin Peterson's flintlock when he was first approached about it, and then I believe that he lied about needing Bill Weld on his ticket to get into the polls when Jill Stein is able to make it into the polls without Bill Weld on her ticket, what would he do if he's elected? Read my lips. No new taxes. If you like your health care plan, you can keep it. Career politicians, they love to lie. And the new one on the block is, vote for me. I'm Gary Johnson, and I'm a libertarian. And I believe that anyone supporting him is being played a fool. Gary doesn't love libertarianism, but he sure does apparently love Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and gun-grabbing Bill Weld, who, as CNN said, proposed, quote, some of the strictest gun control laws in the country, including a statewide ban on some forms of semi-automatic rifles, a waiting period to buy handguns, and a prohibition against gun ownership for anyone under 21, end quote. That's the guy that Johnson thinks is the original libertarian and is his role model in politics. So, in short, libertarians shouldn't love Gary Johnson because Gary Johnson doesn't love libertarians.
And Charles,
Ooh, that's cool.
Why should libertarians love Gary Johnson?
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow up on that realm of positivity we just witnessed there. But I'm going to say, why should libertarians love Gary Johnson? Because Gary Johnson loved libertarians before he was ever a politician. 1984, he was 31 years old. He said, I am going to vote for the Libertarian Party over Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is the flagship boy to the Republican Party. He, despite the fact he has been dead for over a decade, is still their mascot on every logo they can possibly do. And he said it wasn't good enough for me. And he said the reasons were the war on drugs, him not being a fiscal conservative, and also his foreign policy being flat out insane. That is libertarianism right there. That is saying on social issues he's wrong, on fiscal issues he's wrong, on foreign policy he's wrong. Gary Johnson, first governor in the country to come out and say marijuana should be legal. Bill Weld was the first governor, Republican governor, to say gay marriage should be legal. Medical marijuana should be legal. They've both cut spending in their states. They've both cut budgets. Right now, running these campaigns, if they were political opportunists, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld could have both run in the Republican primary if they wanted to this year and probably gone somewhere across the run if they did a generic Republican platform. They didn't. Gary Johnson had the opportunity to run for some other offices where they were said to raise the positions. In fact, in 2000, Gary Johnson had people from the Republican Party approach him and say, oh, you should run as a Republican. And he said, well, okay, here are my stances. I'm pro-choice. And they're like, never mind, because they wouldn't, and they said, change the pro-choice thing, the pro-life thing, and we'll support you to run for president. He said, I won't do that. He's a guy who does compromise. But you know, when he compromises with reality. He said, this is what we're going to get done, or we're not going to get it done at all. And I think that that's a strategy here. And you know, when it comes to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton with Gary Johnson, I have a couple problems with Gary. When it came to the I Side With quiz, I sided 94% with Darryl Perry, 93% with Gary, and 92% with Austin Peterson. So I do have some problems with Gary. But you know what? Gary does not support a 40% tariff on China. Gary does not support taking 11 million people and deporting them from one part of the country to another. Gary Johnson is a libertarian on social issues, on fiscal issues, on foreign policy issues, and he's running against two of the biggest monsters the big party's ever thrown up. And you know, unlike all the other candidates that have ever run for the Libertarian Party nomination, every week he gets out there and he does talk about the big issues. He might not be a hobbyist libertarian like some of the other people. He might not be as pure, but he is getting out there. He is getting the brand out there, and he's talking about real things, pardoning people, ending the wars, cutting spending. And with that, I'm going to say Johnson Weld 2016, and it's on my T-shirt. I've had this since 2011.
Hasn't washed it since.
Oh,
Great. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Liberty Hangout Podcast. Make sure you go subscribe to Liberty Hangout Podcast on iTunes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Liberty Hangout is the hashtag, or the Twitter handle. And make sure you also visit libertyhangout.org and read some awesome liberty-minded material from a great lineup of writers. And also please do the same for Being Libertarian, visiting the website beinglibertarian.com. Thank you all, and we will see you next time.